Superman is one of the few characters in comic books I actually care about enough that whether the comic book is good or not, I'll stick with it for the most part, even if I don't actually read the entire issue. I love Superman enough where I'm going to be in there, I'm going to be reading the comic book. Superman Son of Kal-El has been an odd book for me. I really like Jon Kent prior to Brian Michael Bendis taking over the character, but Tom Taylor's Jon Kent Superman has been absolutely atrocious. The first issue was awful. The second issue was unbearable. And now we're on issue number 11, and I saw this headline from Screen Rant before New Comic Tuesday for DC, and it said, DC's new Superman stands up to Batman better than Clark ever did. They're like, oh boy, I bet he did, because everything that Jon Kent does is better than Clark ever did. He already explained it to him in issue number 2. That's why it was unreadable. I don't know what it is about Tom Taylor. The guy is really good in Elseworlds, but he really can't do like a satisfying or high quality ongoing series. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I would say that his Superman Son of Kal-El is his worst ongoing work, even worse than X-Men Red, which is another comic I would label as unreadable. But this headline definitely had me intrigued. I was like, ooh, Jon Kent's going to stand up to Batman. Is he going to put him in his place? And something weird happened. I'll put this out up front. Of all 11 issues, I guess there's 12 because there was an annual. Of the 12 issues of Superman Son of Kal-El that have been produced to date, this is the very best issue. I could almost, like, if I squinted real hard and I turned my head, I could almost recommend it. I don't, because the series has been atrocious, but as a standalone story here, there's some interesting stuff here, specifically with Adam, that I thought was really cool. But it still is Tom Taylor's Jon Kent book, so there are some big-time issues specifically about Jon Kent standing up to Batman. And you know what's shocking about this one is Batman's right. What Batman tells Superman ends up being correct. And then they just gloss over it and just run right past it, even though that he was vindicated. Now let's get to this and explain what I'm talking about. We get this scene, and this is the one they're talking about in the article, and Batman and Jon Kent are having this conversation because Batman has John in a safe house with his mother and his grandparents. Batman says, you're young, emotional, and from what I've observed, too trusting. I'm concerned you may be manipulated. With Clark away, someone needs to look out for you. John points his finger at Clark and says, I don't need your protection. Batman says, I'm not just protecting you. Your decisions affect all of us. You are the most powerful being on this planet. You need to start acting like it. As you can see, John has his fist clenched because he's about to murder Batman for upsetting him about his boyfriend, speaking some truth. And he says to himself, I want to yell at him. I want to defend Jay. I want to grab Batman's ears and pull his cowl right over his sanctimonious face. The problem is, remember, he's got a closed fist there. He wants to do more than that. He wants to punch him into the sun. That is the confrontation that we get. And then when Batman talks to Podhead, he explains he believes Jay Nakamura might be the leader of an eco-terrorist group, which is essentially verified in these next few pages as Jay Nakamura lovingly and tenderly explains all the stuff that's been happening with Bendix and the revolutionaries who had their heads blown off and stuff like that. Apparently, the revolutionaries are the metahumans who saved Jay Nakamura after he escaped Bendix and Gamora on a ship. Oh my goodness. These are the metahumans that Jay Nakamura first came into contact with. They would have shaped who he is in the mission of the truth. So this is his first contact with quote-unquote heroes and whatnot. And then he explains to the old Jon Kent what they're all about. I'm not saying they're perfect people. They've definitely killed people. But I know they also stopped a war. I know they've saved a nation. So he's really justifying to Jon Kent that the revolutionaries aren't so bad. Sure, they murder people, but hey, they stopped a war. You got to believe me. You know, I'm the truth. And they saved a nation. Of course, it's never elaborated on what nation it is, but how is it that Jon Kent in that moment doesn't have dinging bells going off in his head going, oh my goodness, Batman is right. He is consorting with terrorists. Jay Nakamura is motivated and consorting with murderers. And he's justifying, he's like, I'm not saying they're perfect people or anything. Sure, they've killed a lot of people, but they stopped a war. Just believe me. How incompetent does Jon Kent look here? Like, this is pretty ridiculously stupid. And it's just glossed over. Tom Taylor set up the big confrontation between Superman, Son of Kal-El, Jon Kent, and Batman. Batman tells him what he believes is happening. Superman, Jon Kent, goes and talks to his lover, and he essentially confirms it and Jon Kent does nothing about it. Does it seem like he's being manipulated? Does it seem like maybe he's emotionally immature, that he's not acting on this and being like, you know what, Jay? It might be time for me to shut the truth down since you're consorting with murderers and essentially excusing their behavior. Tom Taylor is supposed to be like one of the better comic book writers out there. I don't see it. He can write Elseworld stuff when he doesn't have rules, but when you have a story and you introduce a conflict and this backs it up and Jon takes no action towards it and has no moment of realization that, yes, Batman was right. Jay Nakamura, my lover, is the bad guy here. I don't want to see one more headline from one more shill site that says Jon Kent is a better fucking Superman than Clark Kent. Clark Kent will do a lot of things, but he will never, ever bend his morals and principles. He wouldn't even do it for Lois Lane. If Lois Lane was a murderer, Clark Kent would put her in prison because that's who he is. That's why he's the world's greatest superhero. Jon Kent's lover admits that his organization works with murderers and he has no issues about it. He acts like he never even heard it. How is this character considered Superman? He shouldn't even have the S on his uniform, and he shouldn't be allowed to have the name at this point. And yes, I'm very tired of these shill sites trying to act like Clark Kent is some type of second-rate superhero to Jon Kent. This is actually what they said in the article about this confrontation. Bruce Wayne and Kal-El have been best friends and sometimes enemies throughout their long storied careers, but Superman has struggled to stand up to Batman when the two disagree. That's not to say they haven't had some epic battles and that Superman hasn't had his fair share of wins, but ultimately, it's generally Superman who bends to Batman when the two butt heads. What the fuck kind of comic book universe have you been reading? Just because Superman doesn't kill Batman when he has a differing opinion and is willing to talk things out with him, you never ever see Superman, you know what, Bruce, I know 100% within my heart what you're doing is wrong, but we're going to do it because I don't want any confrontation with you. When the hell did this narrative come up that somehow Clark Kent is scared of confrontation against Bruce Wayne? Clark Kent is the moral apex in DC Comics. He's willing to talk with you, even when he thinks you're wrong, because that's part of who he is as a character. But he never just goes, you know what, Batman, I've argued my case. You haven't come to my side. I'm just going to step aside and let you lead. I'm just going to do all the stuff you say, and I'm going to let my morals and principles take a backseat to you. Never happened in the comic books. That statement is an absolute bastardization of the relationship between Batman and Superman and character assassination on the part of Clark Kent. That is not who he is, and that's not who he's ever been. And I'll tell you what he's never done. He's never looked the other way when someone he was close to admitted that they were consorting with criminals and they were okay with murder, as long as it was for the right reasons. There's a few other things that really bother me in this comic book issue, even though I kind of like it. One of them is the recalibration of the relationship between Jon Kent and Nightwing, which has never existed until like 8 weeks ago when it was introduced by Tom Taylor. These two have never really hung out. They're in completely different age brackets. Jon Kent wouldn't go to Dick Grayson for advice concerning his lover, Jay Nakamura. He would go to Damian Wayne, the person he actually trusts. Well, first he would go to his father, but he's on another planet. The next person would be Damian Wayne, the other super son, his best friend. He would go to him for advice because they have a relationship where they can talk about stuff like this. Tom Taylor has decided because he's the Nightwing writer, that needs to be the mentor for Jon Kent, when we all know the only real mentor for Jon Kent is Clark Kent, his father, the only person with similar superpowers, and the apex of morality in the DC Comics universe. I fucking hate this. It needs to go away soonest. But he does it again. He decides to reshape another relationship that really hasn't existed in DC Comics history. And these characters have existed for 80 years. Now that Tom Taylor's in charge, he's decided that all along, Pa Kent and Alfred were fucking besties. And they've been talking to each other for years about how they feel about Clark and Bruce the whole time. They've had 70 or 80 years to make this relationship happen, and it never happened before. And the idea that these two characters, Alfred and Pa Kent, have just been talking to each other all the time about their boys' lives, but no one ever knew about it is absolutely ridiculous. Do you think Superman wouldn't know that Pa Kent and Alfred were talking on the phone? He can literally hear everything. You don't think he keeps an ear out for his mom and dad? And the idea that Bruce is somehow trusting enough that you've had Pa Kent calling into Wayne Manor for decades and they've been talking about their boys and he never knew about it is absolutely ridiculous. Tom Taylor needs to think about the fucking characters he's writing and not the relationships he wished existed in the comic books. This isn't the worst idea in the history of the world, but it needed to happen like 50 years ago. But he's Tom Taylor, and what he does is destroy comic books. He destroys canon. He ignores it and reshapes it and all that kind of stuff. This is, without a shadow of a doubt, the very best issue of Superman, Son of Kal-El. Number 11 is the best issue he's done so far, but there's still enormous issues with it. Batman confronts Jon Kent. He says, your boyfriend is an eco-terrorist. And Jon is upset. He wants to defend him, but he could be right. He goes and talks to him. Jay Nakamura, his lover, backs him up and says, you know what? Yes, I do consort with murderers, but they're okay, guys, because, you know, they stopped a war, right? Well, what were you talking about? No information given whatsoever. Jon just goes right over his head because apparently Jon Kent is as clueless as Tom Taylor when it comes to this stuff. Like, does Tom Taylor even recognize what he did right there? Like, he confirmed what Batman was saying. Jay Nakamura is the bad guy. He's working with murderers. Jon Kent didn't notice. And if he did not care. Doesn't really feel in line with a character like Superman. It's time to strip him of the symbol, and it's time for him to earn his stripes in the DC Comics universe because he's not doing a very good job of it right now. Jon Kent has a best friend. His name is Damian Wayne. He's never had a relationship with Dick Grayson before. Pa Kent and Alfred probably know who they are. I imagine they've spoken over the years, but they didn't call each other 3 times a week to check up on how the boys were doing. If that was in canon, it would have been discovered by now. You literally have a character that can hear everything going on, and the other character is the most distrustful, illegally spying on people character in the whole DC universe. Like, get out of here with that shit. If you need further evidence that Tom Taylor is a terrible writer for Superman, I actually did a review of the second issue, Superman Son of Kal-El number 2. This is when I knew that this series was going to be absolute dog shit. This was the confirmation I needed after issue number 1. Wasn't very good. This is one of the worst comics that's come out in a long time.